Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.
Making It Personal with Bishop William Johnson on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. I'm Jean Till, and on today's show, we're visiting with someone very familiar to all of you, Bo Bonner, host of the Catholic Morning Show and co-host of The Uncommon Good.
And the tables are turned. I get to be the interviewer, and you're my interlocutor here, so, Bo, but we'll give you a great opportunity. But first, I'm going to just do a little riff here, if I may.
Sounds good.
So congratulations to all the graduates at Dowling Catholic High School last night, the graduation and the baccalaureate mass preceding it on Thursday at St. Francis of Assisi. Wonderful spiritual and civic occasions, and now the next chapter of their life. Many, many honors and many good paths for all of them. We'll be confirming this morning at Our Lady of the Americas, then heading over to St. Patrick and Audubon. Tomorrow morning, St. Brendan and Leon. I love that parish. There's something about being there. I think everybody, there's about 3 families. Everyone's related, and there's extended clans that are part of that. And then next week, looking forward, as I mentioned, with Archbishop Naumann on a show a couple weeks ago, the installation of Archbishop-designate Sean McKnight as the Archbishop of Kansas City in Kansas. So a wonderful celebration. Regent bishops will no doubt be present. And again, Pope Leo, thank you, God. Thank you for this great gift and who guiding our church and inspiring all of us. And as a bishop, to see one who has that shepherd's role and with great humility, passion for the poor, to be a unifier, not one who sets people and sets up divides, that resisting that kind of dichotomous lens through which we kind of try and put people in as well. But Bo Bonner, it's so wonderful to have you. Our association and your previous employment with Mercy College of Health Sciences as mission officer engage me. You're an educator at heart, very much focused on the topics of communication. We're eventually going to delve into artificial intelligence here and Antiqua et Nova, which you and Bud Marr have had a series of podcasts, but and then wrestling besides. So you're not just a walking, talking head here, but so why the passion for wrestling?
Well, I mean, 2 things. One is, of course, Plato. Of course, they surmised was a wrestler. Plato, the philosopher, right? His name means the broad one, and so they thought he was a wrestler before he went ahead and did philosophy. But more down to the point is living in Oklahoma, being an Oklahoma State fan, Oklahoma State wrestling, of course. No offense to all the Iowans out there, the most national championships in wrestling of all others. And of course,
hey, wait, who's paying for this microphone?
but wrestling, I got to say, one of the, I played all the sports as in a little town. So you get to play a lot of sports. One thing about wrestling is it's you, like you have to do it. You're tired, you win, you lose. And it's not, team sports are extremely important in exactly a sort of complementary way. But there's something about wrestling where, even if you win, you're worn out because you have to be so absolutely present there to win at wrestling, or even just to put on a good show. And if the elemental aspect of wrestling, even if you want to play football, you'll be a better tackler if you've done wrestling. If you want to do basketball, like the footwork, you can get into all of these reasons why I think anyone and everyone should do wrestling. But the Okie vibes, right? Like Oklahoma, Iowa, Pennsylvania, right? The big wrestling states. And, being from that element and just cheering on wrestling and having great teams with John Smith to cheer on, into the years 2000s and stuff. So it's just been...
Remember that name. So, yeah. So now, girls, women's wrestling, yes or no?
So I'd say this, I think wrestling, when you get into, jiu-jitsu or like grappling sports, I think so, especially since I remember when there would be the random girl in the 80s trying to wrestle and they had to wrestle with the boys, that actually caused more problems. The fact that there's like a burgeoning women's wrestling and there's going to soon be women's coaches and things like that, no, I think that's great. I'll probably show myself to be old school that like women in striking sports. And I think people can like throw out like boxing and UFC sort of just as a general question, like should we have those in general? So maybe call me old school. There's a part of me that
old school.
Oh, that doesn't mind. It doesn't mind dudes doing that. But
Thank you for that succinct response.
He's passionate about wrestling.
Yeah. And artificial intelligence, there's no algorithm for wrestling, is there?
And we're going to take a break. We will take that quick break, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Bo Bonner, host of the Catholic Morning Show and co-host of The Uncommon Good. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. And on today's show, we're visiting with Bo Bonner, host of the Catholic Morning Show and co-host of The Uncommon Good.
Before we talk further with biomechanics, Jean, our prayers go out to you on next Tuesday. Your knee replacement surgery, may it go well.
Thank you.
We have confidence that the shoulder surgeries went well, and may the outcome. One was a little rougher than the other, but
that's true.
Yeah,
I'm on the retirement surgery plan. I would not recommend it to anyone.
Okay. Well, and to have empathy for you is something that would elude AI as well. But, this sense there, we could talk about, as we've talked about with Professor Jim Madden at Benedictine College, not just talking about, ratiocination, these kind of, ends, means things, but just the whole experience of bodiliness, the way in which wonder is stirred and the awakening of that and emotion. AI, you mentioned me offline. We need to demystify it.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, in one way, you could say artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligence. And then the other thing you can say is if you broaden the term so much, it can be useless. There's a real way in which books are artificial intelligence, right? The written word printed is an imitation of our ability to memorize things. So, if you want to say all artificial intelligence is bad, you have to start saying, well, are books problematic? And you can go back and look at old philosophers who were worried about things being written down. In a similar way, I think we can sometimes get too focused that AI means only this, only that. But I think people have the general sense they're usually talking about generative AI. Even though we've been using generative AI for years. Every time you text and it predicts how you messed up a word and replaces it, that's artificial intelligence, that's generative AI. And so to get to the reality of the situation and not let it be like a robot over the hill or, a myth that's like sort of coming over us. But, on one hand, to be very particular about the reality of the situation, how do they work? But then in also ways in which we, a lot of times I think what we hate about a lot of technologies, the digital, artificial intelligence, is usually things we hate about ourselves mirrored in the AI.
Ouch.
I mean, but when people talk about, all these AI, they're writing, they're generating, essays on their own, and isn't that terrible? But, we've taught our children to write algorithmically for decades. Mm-hmm. Harvard invented an algorithm of grammar mostly in the 1910s, right? Their response to sort of the Oxford English Dictionary and things like this. And they made, the 5-paragraph monster. They didn't call it that, but that's sort of the typical way that students are instructed to compose essays. That's an algorithm. Like, that's a technical term for algorithm.
The paragraph is a lost art, though, I find.
Well, but exactly right. Switching it from art to industrial instruction. I mean, that's what we've done already. And then we're mad the robots do it better. You do realize, right, that the generative AIs, part of the sort of meat and potatoes they learned to write was when professors like me would turn in students' essays to Turnitin, which would it was this program that, plagiarism detection. That's what they trained on. They trained on things like this. We fed the AIs all this human speech, and now we're amazed that they sound like that. And to me, that's what I start to mean by this demystification, is to have us stop and ask, what are we really talking about, and what is our role in creating it, sustaining it, and then making up stories to skip out on the responsibility we should have towards it.
Oh, wow. You're blowing me away here, man. As you do frequently, Bo, in a positive way. You're saying that books are artificial intelligence in a genre of that. That to me, they're a kind of capturing of speech acts, which are performances that convey meaning, create a communion between us, of that the reality that we're sharing, even if it's an imagined thing, even if it's Shakespeare or whatever, that might be there. And so the symbolic translation of that, but evoking something that what happens between us. If someone says, attention or please or I salute you,
mm-hmm.
That these go beyond just kind of the meanings that are there that create a response and an activity that is part of that. So, I'm not totally on board with you yet in terms of putting books in that same genre.
No, and to me, we don't have to. We just have to be careful, right? Because if we talk about artificial intelligence in one way, it's going to be nearly anything we make, right? Because artifice just means artifact art, right? So even when we say the art of blank, that is an artificial thing. So clearly, what I think is we don't mean that. We don't want artificial intelligence as a word to mean something so expansive that we're drawing in books and things like this. So the question is, what do we mean? And I think that this Vatican document gets at the heart of this. I think I'm stealing this from Bud, and he probably plagiarized. We're also good at this, just plagiarizing as humans. But, there was a theologian that said, angels are the good counterfactual when thinking about humans, right? When we think about what humans aren't compared to angels, that's really helpful to think like what a human actually is. I think this document does that with AI. In some ways, this document is great at saying what humans are by contrasting them to what we mean by generative AI, large language models, latency maps, this sort of stuff like this. By this long consideration, I actually think this is a great article, a great essay, a great work to have students, in their sort of intro classes to philosophy read this to talk about what a human is, which is why I like this document so much. It spends a lot of time on what humans are, and then from that derives what artificial intelligence has to be, because what it is ultimately is not human. It's imitative of humans, and I think that's what we mean by the artificial part. It's a mimicry of intelligence. What do they call it? The chiastic parrot. That's a very technically dorky term, but I mean that's it, right? Is it and you can even ask the AI, and it will explain this about itself. Is it takes what it considers like the tokenization of human language. It breaks human language down into tokens, and then makes a prediction about the most likely next token that should follow. But that's not how our intelligence works, because our intelligence is embodied, contextual, it has a form. And what's funny is like the large language models know this about themselves, quote unquote, know. You can ask them and they'll repeat this back to you. But we mystify it more than the chat GPTs themselves do.
Thank you. I think, you closed the circle there on that question that I posed to you about demystification. Not trying to ask gotcha questions here, but as we kind of let this flow spontaneously, the difference between probability, which AI, that's its stock and trade, versus phronesis, prudence, which is also taking into account multiple possible finite goods or contingencies and then acting on it in terms of a good, right? Can AI comprehend good?
Well, so comprehend, if we get to that idea of being able to, as it were, envelop a concept. No, and that's not their role or their goal. Both AIs and humans at their best are pattern recognition entities. And the AIs, they seem so fabulous because of their brute computational speed. Allows them to seemingly make pattern recognitions instantaneously. But that's because it's something much more akin, like, I don't know how much with like electricity, like electrician sort of lore, but when they're testing out circuits, right, like when they're first wiring buildings, and I don't know if this is still how they do it, but at one point what they would do is they put little light bulbs at the sort of junction places where each of the circuit wires meet each other, and then they would turn on the switch. And everywhere a light turned on, that meant the circuit was complete. But where the lights didn't turn on, they knew they needed to do something. That's how AI does pattern recognition. It, as it were, can send a latency signal across all of the knowledge it's been trained on, and nearly instantaneously, a light bulb turns on or it doesn't. And it can gather those sort of pattern recognitions. What I argue is that human pattern recognition is something much more akin to cooking, where we take the various ingredients and through the heat of like attention and intentionality, we reduce those multitudes of things into one integral thing and have a unified concept. And the AIs can never do that. It's not possible. They don't have the time, the outlay, any of that stuff to be able to do those things. So us, as it were, cooking ideas into concepts is radically different than the AI pattern recognition. And so that's, to your point, like that's why probability is sort of the stuff of AI's quote-unquote intelligence, where ours is something much more different. You don't have to think that intuition is sort of like magical or even mystical. We can say it's like, background, unconscious, or, various people can say different things, but it's still not what the AIs do, and they've never been programmed to do that way. And that's something important for us to keep in mind when in the ways we decide to interact with AIs as tools. And then worry about what I think they'll be used for is like the most sinister marketing machine possible, because it will seem convincing in a way even like a billboard or an internet video advertisement isn't. I mean, that to me is the by mystifying AI, they're going to sell a lot of product and a lot of political ideas if we're not careful, which is why it's ethically important to talk this way.
Okay. So, here you are laying down the caveats, the warning, there's cautions that go with this. But we're here and we're immersed in this. And as Christians, Catholic Christians, do we need to make our peace with it, to befriend AI in some way? But you said we're behind the curve and really kind of getting our wits about us in this whole realm.
Yeah, I would say it's important not to befriend these unless you are only meaning it,
metaphorically,
poetically, right? But that's the problem, right? Is what, if you said, I'm going to befriend a book, everyone's like, oh, Bo's being a poet. But I think there's people who are like, oh, my best friend, the AI, right? Then that's the difficulty is people, so.
And tragically, the young man who took his own life.
Absolutely, right? And, I was just talking to someone that, I've been married 19 years. So I'm not worried about the dating life, but someone's saying like, oh yeah, all of my friends who date, they'll go talk to the AI and it nearly always suggests you break up with the person. Right. And, this seems, of course, there's probably lots of explanations, right? Because it's easy to sort of shoot holes in anyone's sort of personality or whatever. But that is to think that this thing can know what it means, like how love works. And because it can seem convincing that way. So my argument would be we need to not befriend AI, but certainly come to terms and understand there's some aspects to it which was every medieval monk's dream, right? To have this array of human memory to access. And utilized in that way, and not even utilized, related to it in that way, there is a revolution in understanding that it will aid with. Like, I'm convinced of this. But to get to that good end, we have to be very careful about the ways in which it will flatten human relationships otherwise. If we don't stop that, we won't get to what can be the benefit and outcome of a lot of human endeavor and effort that brought us to that place.
Well, and about most people don't think like you and Bishop.
I know. They're better people than we. They got more free time.
Amen. But, this is going to be a convenience. This is going to be easy. This is going to be all those things that we're just going to embrace. We're just going to embrace it. All of a sudden, we're going to be way down this hole that we don't want to be in.
Absolutely.
And won't know how to get out.
And, this
and our neurological circuits will be rewired.
And I mean, this starts to be,
sorry for the mechanical
metaphor.
But
this is exactly right. Like, this is, Marshall McLuhan, we create our tools and then our tools recreate us. And human understanding after the book was different than before the book. After the printing press, different than before it. Go on down the line. And I mean, in many ways, I want to argue that the digital world itself is a response to the fantasy production world of what the electric age, so television. We all sort of had family members get back from the brutality of World War II. What did they want to do? Forget the world. So they fantasy broadcast a better world. But then people, Generation X, going into the millennials, there was something inauthentic about all this. And so there's this yearning for memory and authenticity and all these things like this. And so we created a robot that could get to the bottom of things. Now, authenticity, of course, is the best trapdoor to trick people, right? Because authenticity itself can be sort of a disguise, right? Like faux authenticity, whatever. But what I'm getting at is this is at the heart of things. Is people want to be able to do that, to ask and discover and dive into and look into. But your point about efficiency ruling all and obscuring all things, it took us how many years before we realized the dangers, like, for instance, a car presented, and what we would need to do to, live in a world with automobiles better. What does it do to the environment? We even haven't gotten to the fact that AIs are a huge environmental drain. Like, the cobalt along is a human disaster because of the slave mines in Africa used to derive the precious metals to make
the
those.
Silk Road that the Chinese have,
Absolutely. And so that's beyond going from the fact that, I mean, at this point, I think they have it down about how much water you have to use to make a Google search versus ask a ChatGPT, and ChatGPT takes more water, right? They're not disembodied spirits. In some ways, AI is the most embodied thing there has ever been because of the ecological outlay.
Wow, that's a radical thing for me to think about. That never put it in those terms, but Pope Francis Laudato Si would appreciate this. I think boiling down in one way, the quote that I'm sure you've cited with Bud, the French Catholic author George Bernanos warned that the danger is not in the multiplication of machines, but in the ever-increasing number of men accustomed from their childhood to desire only what machines can give, the reduction of desire. So on that note, Gene's pining to reel it in, Johnson. All right.
Stay with us as we continue our conversation with Bo Bonner, host of the Catholic Morning Show and co-host of Uncommon Good here at Iowa Catholic Radio. If you would like to read the document that Bishop and Bo are talking about, Antiqua et Nova, you can find it at vatican.va and just go to their search engine and type in that title, Antiqua et Nova. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson.
Thank you, Gene, and Bo Bonner. Thank you for remaining with us. And you're giving much to chew on here as I'll emerge from this.
I like chewing.
And contemplation. That even the act of contemplation. That there's not just something to monetize here, or there's some kind of practical application. Although there's certainly numerous ones that we need to talk about, and some of the concerns with that. But this Antiqua et Nova, speaking about love and service, echoing the divine life of self-giving, transcends selfish interest to respond more fully to the human vocation. Ultimately, a steadfast orientation to the truth is essential for charity to be both authentic and universal. That what we come to know, the truth we come to know, and even to speak of that relationship with the truth, where the world and reality is manifested interiorly to us, that we love it. We love it,
Yeah, so Bernino, who you gave a quote to, earlier, he has another one, it's not mentioned here, where he goes, the time is coming when the human race will have plenty of saviors but no friends left to vouch for them. And that idea about, what does it mean to love someone enough to be a friend? And to me, that's sort of the most disturbing thing about how people are using AIs as replacements, as friends. And that if you want to talk about a failure we adults often do for children, is we have decided to make friendship and human relationships so utilitarian that there are people who find it easier to mimic friendship with the AI just because it's sort of friendly and encouraging than to take the risk that it takes to love someone enough to be a friend. And when that occurs, that's when you start to see all these practical implications that are frankly terrifying and at our gate right now. So, for instance, in healthcare, I'm just echoing what Charlie Camosi said when he came to Des Moines a few years ago. We're going to have this huge memory crisis, right, with dementia patients, and we're not going to have enough nurses to care for them. They're already talking about sending AIs to go talk to the dementia patients. And anybody who knows anyone who's suffered with memory care, it's not half the time talking is the most difficult part of that. But we think that there's something inalienable, foundational to just being with someone in their pain. And the AIs cannot do that. Mm-hmm. So think about that in nearly everything. Think about that in warfare. They had a drone that they used, and they didn't have live ammunition with this, luckily. They had a drone that had artificial intelligence, and it gave it strict perimeters, like don't attack the control tower, stuff like this. And then it gave it a sort of mock-up about how it should rank, what targets it should do. And the thing figured out, the best and most efficient way to get all those targets is to destroy the control tower, because then I have no guideposts and I can do this all quicker. Now, all of these are human failings, right? The robots do not come up with this stuff on their own. They are the mirror that reflect the sort of sinfulness, right? Humans have been this way to each other without the aid of robots for decades. If we keep blaming the robots, we're not taking this time that God has appointed for us, that this technology particularly can be a mirror for us to look at ourselves. It's a great lent of technological discernment if we let it be. But I'm afraid we're going to just keep blaming the robots rather than asking who were the Frankenstein doctors who created these things, running away from it rather than asking, why do we keep making practical robots do stuff like shoot better, make it that we don't have to care for the people who are sick? et cetera, et cetera. That is a spiritual sickness that has nothing with the robots.
Wow, and time is already winding down. So much that is part of it here too. But you know that the clinical encounter could be facilitated by having something that's taking in, kind of like Alexa or whatever, taking all this down and not interposing a machine between things. That there is a positive benefit that could be gained by this as well.
Good telemetry.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the points made in the Antiqua et Nova also, as we wind this down and prepare to say farewell, that social scoring, where we're kind of the product of our past choices and clicks and everything else, admitting no possibility of reform, conversion, or remorse, shame. We talked about that before. That we get defined by this. So are we in need of conversion in terms of the defense and other applications that are there? Bo, I've put a question out there that I'm not going to give you the chance, I'm sorry, to answer, but questions to ponder, and you've been most provocative, as always. And thank you, and wish your family well as we move into the conclusion of the year.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. Thanks to our guest and to all of our listeners throughout the Midwest, or wherever you may be listening, to the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.